For 200 years, the UK's rail network has moved passengers from place to place. Tens of thousands of men, women and children have boarded trains every single day since those earliest journeys. For the vast majority, the journey ends without incident, but for an unlucky few, something goes wrong and the railway adds another disaster to the record books. We tell the stories of those darkest days and the people caught up in them. Welcome to Signals to Danger.
3 people have died after a passenger train derailed near Stonehaven in Aberdeenshire this morning and caught fire.
We went through a massive fireball. I could feel the heat coming through the windows, and all the windows I could see were just orange.
36 people were killed and more than 100 injured in this morning's train crash at Clapham Junction in South London. 2 commuter trains carrying more than 1,300 passengers collided shortly after 8 o'clock. A third train ran into the wreckage.
Hello, and welcome to the Rail Safety Review for the 16th of June 2025. My name is Dan, and I am the producer of the Signals to Danger podcast. For those of you who are a little new to the podcast, and in fact for those of you who are returning, let me briefly run through the format as I'm switching up a little and tightening up on the production schedule as well, which I'm sure you'll all be glad to hear. We've been gone for a while now, not gone clearly, but it wouldn't be accurate to say that the production cycle to date has been either smooth or regular. But in lieu of giving you a long list of reasons/excuses, I'm just going to say that the podcast is back properly this time, and I'm incredibly happy to be producing it again. So let's talk about the format going forwards. We'll start, probably sensibly, with main episodes. These are the days that you get to sit and hear me waffle on for around an hour about a specific incident, telling the story and going into all of the details around it. These are now going to be on a generally 2-week release cycle, so every 2 weeks there'll be a main episode, and the next one of those is going to cover Purley, the 1989 accident in the south of London, and I'll be bringing that one out on the 23rd of June, a week after you're listening to this today. In between the main episodes, we're going to have our rail safety review episodes, and that is these ones. A bit faster paced than they used to be, a little bit more conversational. They used to call them RAIB roundups, but I think that the new name gives a bit more flexibility on what I can cover in the time. A bit more scope. Generally speaking, if there is RAIB content, it is going to focus in on that because that's kind of what we do. And this episode is going to be fairly RAIB heavy, to be fair, but I have got some catching up to do. They're going to be a little bit shorter, not the length of a full episode, probably a quick whip through of events that have taken place and reports that have been finalised. What I don't want to do, however, is have the workload of producing these reduce the quality or the frequency of the actual full episodes. So that's why I'm going to try and bring it down a little bit, because for those full episodes, a bit of an insight for you, for me to talk for about an hour to you, those scripts tend to be around about 7,000 or 8,000 words long. There's all the research that goes into that, and to be honest with you, if it's in Wales, there's quite a bit of pronunciation research that has to go in on top of that as well. So there is a bit of a workload. So I figured by cutting down these current affairs type programs, I can focus in on getting those long episodes. Not just long, but full of good stuff you want to hear, stuff that's worth talking about. If nothing much has happened in the world of railway safety, we'll still put the RSR episodes out, the rail safety reviews, but it may be a little bit more conversational. I'll find a topic to talk about. There is always something that's worth discussing. If it's maybe we'll go on about a certain safety system for a little while, maybe we'll have a chat about the importance of corporate memory. There's lots to talk about, even if there's nothing happening. And let's be fair, we all really want there to be nothing happening, because this podcast gets content when things go wrong, and the end goal of all of it is for things not to go wrong. There is a third type of episode that I'm going to be doing now. It's new with this sort of iteration of the podcast. It's the flash briefings. Now, these aren't going to be on any frequency schedule. I'm not going to tell you when you're going to see them, because the message here is as and when. If there is a major bit of news, an accident or similar, the intention is to produce a flash briefing to quickly talk about what we know now. So think along the lines of a news flash, a breaking news cut-in, that sort of stuff. In fact, at the point I'd started writing this, I had no idea when the first of these was going to be, but as it happened last week, the RAIB released a safety digest that I thought was worth sharing with you. And that's what it's going to be. They may only be 10, 15 minutes. They may only be 5 minutes if it's something very current, very fresh, and we don't know anything about it. But if you're here listening to Signals to Danger, it's probably a fair estimation that you have an interest in rail safety. And if there is something really important going on in the world of railway safety, let's talk about it. So, short message, Signals is back, and it is a pleasure to be back. I didn't realise quite how much I'd missed producing this podcast until I sat down in front of the mic last week to get that last episode out. It's an energy I'm looking to keep going. So, that's about 5 minutes of waffle. Guess it's time for us to get into the news. There are two recent news stories I'd like to cover, and they both impact the same operator, Transport for Wales. We will start, however, with the dramatic incident of the last few months, and that is the collision between a train and a trailer at Nordan Farm, close to Leominster in Herefordshire. A Transport for Wales service between Manchester and Cardiff, coincidentally one of their premier service trains, when that's loco hauled stock drawn or propelled by a Class 67 and the other end with a driving van trailer. It was happily making progress along the route about 80 miles an hour, and at this point, it happened upon a loaded agricultural trailer drawn by a tractor crossing at Nordan Farm user-worked crossing. With no way to brake in time, the train collided with the trailer, which then got wedged onto the front of the train. The RAIB news bulletin goes on to tell us that the train didn't derail as a result of the accident, but its leading vehicle, the driving van trailer, and some of the leading passenger coaches suffered damage. Of the 66 passengers and 8 staff on board, 6 passengers were reportedly treated for minor injuries, but the tractor driver was uninjured. Damage was also caused to the trailer, and if you look at the pictures, it's a bit of an understatement that the trailer looks fairly confidently a write-off as a result of this wedged on the front of that DVT. And there was also damage to the track, line-side equipment, and a second level crossing beyond Nordan Farm, which is entirely to be expected when you're dragging a big, bulky piece of metal on the front of the train that's kicking up ballast, destroying step plates. The damage is reasonably expected in this situation. The ambulance service had also confirmed that although the injuries were thankfully minor, one person was airlifted to hospital and another one taken to hospital by ambulance, and that 15 more people were assessed by them for injuries. Although I've not seen any confirmation at this point who it is and what their relation is to the incident, there was a 32-year-old man who has been arrested on suspicion of endangering safety on the railway, and that's come from the British Transport Police. All told, the lack of derailment in this incident is pretty lucky considering the size of vehicle that was struck, and we've seen similar incidents where collisions have led to full derailments in the past. If you look at, go back to Polmont, where a chunky bit of cow in the right place managed to tip that, and that was a propelled train without a locomotive at the front of it. We could look at Ufton Nervet, where a car on a level crossing managed to derail a HST spectacularly. So, although there's been advances in safety, the DVTs aren't particularly new. So it's nice to see in this situation that the train stayed upright and on the tracks. User-worked crossings then, they tend to require farmers or others with slow-moving vehicles who are going over them to call the signal box, controlling box. I say signal box, let's be fair, in most situations now this is a call to a rail operating centre several miles away. But the person crossing has to phone up the signaller to check it's alright to cross. And apparently the evidence in this case, according to the RAIB, is that the driver of that tractor did phone the signaller before they crossed the crossing. So I think it's It's a reasonable assumption that that process, that conversation, and anything that happened after it is going to be a really big focus of the investigation to come, and it will definitely be a full report. There's not going to be a safety digest off the back of this one. This will be a full report, which we'll probably talk about later in the year. The other big story to hit in the last few weeks has been the production of an interim report by the branch into the head-on collision between two trains at, and I'm trying my hardest to pronounce this correctly, Talerddig, and that's another Transport for Wales, well, two Transport for Wales trains. The incident is obviously subject to an ongoing full investigation by the branch, so the final conclusions are not available. However, in a way that they've done with quite a few more significant incidents recently, the branch has produced an interim report talking about what they've known so far. This was, to jog people's memory, the one where we saw two Class 158s of the same type of manufacturer of the 158s we talked about at Salisbury last week. And they collided head-on at the line at Talerddig on the Cambrian line, about 900 metres to the west of a passing loop where the trains should have passed each other. One would have stopped and the other would have come past. And as a result of the accident, one passenger died and 4 other people were seriously injured. 11 more had injuries that required hospital treatment. The branch has already been able to piece together a pretty good chunk of the timeline in this incident, and they can identify that the westbound service was the one that was due to stop in the loop. But when the driver applied the brakes to bring the speed down, it didn't have the desired effect, and the emergency brakes were put in 40 seconds later. Trains started sliding under the initial braking and kept doing so throughout. It slowed coming into the loop, didn't come to a stand, slid straight through and travelled for another 900 metres before colliding with the front of the other train at a combined speed of about 30 miles an hour, which doesn't sound phenomenally big compared to some of the incidents we've talked about and some of the energy that's been involved, but it's like hitting a brick wall at 30 miles an hour, two trains heading towards each other. There is conflicting evidence of what speeds were actually involved, but no doubt that's one of the things that the branch is actually focusing on getting Bob on before they produce the full report. If you listened to last week's episode about Salisbury, you will no doubt be completely unsurprised that the branch checked the railhead conditions in the area, and they did find some low adhesion areas, and they point out really crucially, and if you listen to the back end of last week's episode, when we talked about sanders, they found out that the inspection carried out on the automatic I'm really struggling to get this sentence out. I'm not entirely sure why. They found out that the inspection that they carried out on the sanding system of the train after the accident showed that the sanding hoses on the leading vehicle, and these are the ones that would have been needed at the time, were blocked and apparently would have not been able to discharge sand. It would have been pretty detrimental to the braking performance of the train, and if you have gone and had a look at the full Salisbury report, there is a table about 3/4 of the way through there where they show braking distances with various sanding systems, and this is essentially a train that probably didn't have a sanding system at exactly the point when they needed it. In any case, we are not going to draw conclusions. You know that's not what we do. We're going to wait for that final report to be issued. It's a situation where it's going to be pretty challenging not to overestimate just how much of an important factor the sanders could be in this one. It's definitely something that the branch felt worth sharing in the interim report, and people are going to draw conclusions about that. So I like to think that if you're going to put it in there, you've got to have a reasonable level of certainty that it was an influencing factor. But let's wait and see. That would be the two biggest news stories of sort of the last few weeks, but plenty else is going on. The branch may be busy with Talerddig and Nordan Farm, but it does not mean they are the only things that are currently under investigation. Hopefully, they do publish a list on their website of incidents that are currently being looked at, and in present, this equates to about 11 events, so 10 of them are going to receive full investigations, and 1 is making its way into a safety digest. We won't talk about Talerddig and Nordan Farm again, because I've just talked about those, but what are the other 9 things on the branch's plate? Incidents currently under investigation then. First of these is something that's pretty close to home, professionally more than geographically, but not all that far away from where I live. 6th of September last year, then a freight train derailed in Audenshaw in Greater Manchester, and it took place as this train was passing over a bridge. And by Jove, it didn't half cause some problems. The train consisted of two Class 66 locos that were holding 24 wagons, loaded with aggregates, so heavy loads. They were going from Peak Forest to Salford, which was on the other side of Manchester from where it was. The locos and 9 carriages made their way over this bridge quite happily, but the last few, they derailed, causing substantial damage to the bridge in the meantime. Thankfully, nobody was injured in this derailment, but picking up the pieces took some time. And, all the freight trains that were meant to be going that way ended up going different routes, which may or may not have led to some significant performance impacts for passenger operators in the area. Not saying that was privy to a lot of those conversations, but it was a challenge at times. Nobody was injured, like I said, but with a lot of very heavy wagons. Bear in mind, they probably weighed in the region of about 100 tons each, loaded. Both a Network Rail and a Volca rail-mounted Kiro cranes were drafted in to help lift the wagons out of the way. Big old piece of work, took some time. Thankfully, DB Cargo had emptied them using diggers, essentially, prior to actually trying to lift them up, which made quite a significant difference, I imagine, in actually getting them off the track. The bridge that was involved required significant strengthening following the accident, and recovery took around about a week. So, like I said, those displaced freight services did cause some problems, and it was quite some time, I believe, that people were able to pass underneath the bridge, if that even has been resolved yet. The most recent article I could find wasn't that long ago, and Network Rail was talking about the challenges that they were having opening it up. It's essentially got a lot of acros, but a very heavy-duty version underneath the bridge deck. RAIB are, of course, fully investigating this one and will be considering, the usual things that we talk about, but they'll be considering the sequence of events, the condition of the wagons, and the condition of the infrastructure. So if we take that as it is, they're looking to see whether the derailment was caused by a defect with one of the wagons, or was there a problem with the bridge structurally, or was there another piece of infrastructure issues in the area that caused it. Next on the roster of things under investigation, then we're going to look at a trap and drag incident at Ealing Broadway in November 2024, and that when a passenger's hand became trapped in the closing doors of a train on the Elizabeth line. Train started to depart from the platform, passenger still trapped, and then they ended up having to run alongside it for several metres before a member of staff pulled them away from the doors. Driver stopped moving after about 17 metres because he was alerted by nearby passengers. I can imagine some frantic waving, that kind of thing. Luckily or unfortunately, if you frame it in different ways, this passenger received some minor injuries. So, lucky it was only minor injuries. Unfortunately, they were injured as a result of it. So, it is an incident that had the potential to be considerably worse, and it really could have been considerably worse. But unfortunately, we do still see somebody being injured. Full investigation for this one as well, looking at arrangements to manage the risk on what we call the platform train interface, or the PTI, which is the point of boarding trains when I like to refer to it as where the soft, breakable humans meet the immovable hard metals. It's also going to look at investigation of when the risks, how they were managed, when passengers get on and off the trains, coupled with some more general assessment of the situation as it panned out. Moving on somewhat swiftly, the next full investigation which is taking place is a buffer stop bump at London Bridge Station. So on the 13th of December last year, the 1450 Southern service from London Victoria collided with the buffer stops at platform 12 on London Bridge Station. As an event, it's somewhat reminiscent of that which took place at Cannon Street in 1991, rather significantly less impactful. So back in 91, that train was brought to a sudden stop between 5 and 10 miles an hour. But the damage was done. The trains were old, well past their best. I think there's fair things to say. And and 2 of the carriages telescoped in the rear further along the train. Happily, we have come a long way, and even though this incident took place at about a quarter of the speed, so 2.3 miles an hour, the buffers involved were more modern. The train was also more modern, and no injuries were reported. It's nice to see the progression of technology and crashworthiness standards removing the risk of injury, or reducing the risk of injury. You can never remove it, of course. There were damage too with the train and the buffer stops, though it was minor damage, but damage nonetheless. So the investigation is going to focus on the actions of the driver, their management, so looking at their competency management, their line management, and also looking at what arrangements were in place to manage the risk of buffer stop collisions. Hopping along to the next 2 incidents, and unfortunately these 2 are a little more serious and both led to deaths at the start of the year, and they both took place on footpath crossings. First of these was particularly tragic. On the 23rd of January, a child was struck by a train, fatally injured while crossing at Bourneview Foot Crossing in Kenley, which is in Croydon. This one is a foot crossing. It connects 2 residential areas. It's equipped with gates either side and a signage which explains how to cross the railway safely. Crossing takes pedestrians over the Purley and Caterham line, has a line speed of about 60 miles an hour, although the train involved was only travelling at 50. I say only, it's probably a terrible use of the word. 50 miles an hour is 50 miles an hour. The second of these 2 incidents then took place at Pewsey footpath crossing in Wiltshire, where a pedestrian was struck by a train crossing the 100-mile-an-hour Reading to Taunton line, and in this case it was a train that was travelling at 96 miles an hour at the time of the incident. Again, this is a crossing protected by gates and signage, so in both cases the branch is endeavouring to understand the actions of those people who are crossing the line, as well as the management of risk at each crossing, and the history of any incidents at each location. I might have to slow down the talking a little bit because I really do feel like I'm just rocketing through these. But the next accident that's currently under investigation, well, that one took place up north, and by up north I mean really up north, at Port Glasgow station, which is in Inverclyde, just sort of west to the west of Glasgow proper. At about 20:55 on the 15th of March, there was a wagon that was being propelled around by a rail-mounted crane attached to it, but that struck 2 track workers near to Port Glasgow station. This took place within an engineering possession, and as a result, 1 track worker became trapped between the wagon and a track panel which had been previously put down by a second crane, so quite a serious incident in what should be a relatively safe environment for being on the tracks. So both of the cranes were being used as part of the renewal of a section of track, but importantly this was taking place within a possession, so it should have been taking place under the control of a safe system of work or an SSOW. Should have been a person in charge of the possession there, and there should have been a controller of site safety present. So this should be, although the railway is always an inherently dangerous because of the size and scale and weight of the equipment being used, engineering possessions should be relatively safe. However, we do see incidents taking place in them. So this situation here, where someone has been injured as part of it, talking about that safe system of work that should have been in place, unsurprisingly, one of the factors that the RAIB are considering is the planning and coordination arrangements for the work activities that were being undertaken, and they're also going to look at the management and actions of the staff and how the movements of the crane on the day were being handled. Now, we have spoken about incidents during possessions before where things weren't happening in the way that they were supposed to, and this just led to a risky situation developing and leading to a near miss or an accident. So we'll watch keenly to see what comes out of this one. Next, we have another one, unfortunately, that is based around a fatality of one of the people that were involved in it. Going to the 20th of March, so not that long ago now, a passenger fell from a platform onto the track at Ickenham Station. That's on the Metropolitan and Piccadilly lines of the London Underground, if I remember correctly. This one is, well, whenever anyone just falls on the track, it's inherently pretty bad anyway as an isolated incident. So even if there's no trains involved in that from a fall from a platform is a fall of about 4 or so feet onto a surface which is dirty, hard, sharp stones, depending on where you are in the world, 2 rails, both of which are made of hard metal, or 3 or 4 rails, all of which are made of hard metal, and 1 or 2 of them are trying to electrocute you. It's not good to end up down there intentionally or otherwise. I hold a personal track safety certificate. I am allowed to walk on the railway line in the right setting. And I don't like doing it because it's not somewhere you want to be. So even in that isolated, if you talk about someone just falling onto the track, it's not good anyway, but it does happen from time to time. Quite often this is without drastic consequences, but the difference in this case, which turned it into quite a serious incident, is that the person that fell wasn't recovered from the track. They stayed there and ended up being struck by a train. After that, London Underground staff did find them, but this wasn't before they'd received fatal injuries. Really tragic situation, and it will be interesting in a professional curiosity way to read through the report when it's issued and look at timelines, but yeah, it's just a sad situation, the same as the incidents on the footpath crossings. So with this one then, the RAIB will be looking at the actions of those involved, the management of the staff, and what arrangements are in place to control the risks of these types of incidents. And if you've listened to roundups before in the past, before we've moved to this format, you will know that there are quite often some phrases that just keep coming back, and arrangements to control risks is something they're always looking at. This next one then, that is a slight bit different because it's leading into a safety digest and not a full investigation, and also slightly different because it doesn't happen on the mainline rail network. So we're going to Thursday the 17th of April now. The RAIB received reports that a volunteer, who was a volunteer member of staff, had been seriously injured on the Gartel Light Railway. They were struck by a wagon close to a level crossing while the railway was closed. Even though the speed involved was low, this wagon, which was being used for transporting staff as well as equipment and materials around the railway, well, the wagon collided with them as they were trying to alight from it when they were moving, and they caused quite a serious injury. As I said, there's only going to be a safety digest coming out of this one, but it's going to be interesting to see because you do wonder sometimes about operational procedures when you get off the mainline rail network, how that's done. Maybe there's a difference of what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. It's only going to be a safety digest, like I said, but it'll be interesting to read what is contained within it. The next one, though, that is going to be another full report inbound. And it's actually the last one that we're going to talk about today, because we are rattling through them, which is probably why I'm slightly out of breath. So, back to April, the 29th to be exact. Very serious one. A South Western Railways train passing through Brookham Tunnel in Surrey had a near miss with 3 track workers who were walking through the tunnel itself. Staff had completed their work at either end of the tunnel, repairing the telephones located there, key part of being able to contact people, and they were just walking back through the tunnel itself. As they're walking back through the tunnel, they hear an approaching train. 2 of the workers nipped into a refuge that was built into the wall of the tunnel, and the third of them, in something which must have felt very much out of a TV series or a film, flattened themselves against the wall as the train passed them. Luckily, nobody was hurt. I imagine some people were incredibly shook up following it. 3 workers and a driver for a start, because this was a very close call. Now, I hear you ask about, why didn't they get protection before they went into this space, which they shouldn't be in while trains are running? It transpires a block of the line had been requested to prevent trains from running through this tunnel where they were going to be, but it was later discovered that the line blockage had been arranged for the nearby Mickleham Tunnel, and that it didn't cover Brookham Tunnel, where the track workers actually were. So, unexpectedly, they're going to focus on how the work was planned and how the risks associated were managed. And in terms of a list of what the RAIB is currently working on, what they're currently looking through, that does bring us more or less to the end of the list at the moment. I'm sure that there's reports going in daily. Reportable incidents will always be happening. But those are the big ones right now that they are working through, that we are going to see an output for. Next time, if there haven't been much more things going on, what we'll be doing is having a look through the RAIB's annual report for 2024, which should make for some interesting reading. Unless, of course, there is things that have happened that are worth discussing, and we'll cross that bridge in 2 weeks' time when we get there. But at risk of me just babbling to fill time, I might let you all go back about your days and say thank you for joining me. This brings us to the end of our news roundup and also to the end of the Rail Safety Review for this week. It's the first RSR in a while, but not the last. You'll see this format every 2 weeks from now on. So, yeah, thank you for joining me once again. We will be back next week, so that will be the 23rd, I believe. I think it will. My working out dates isn't fantastic, but I'll even click something and check. Yes, the 23rd of June we'll be back to talk about the 1989 Purley collision. And like I said, the week after that, we'll be back looking at another bunch of railway safety chat on the Rail Safety Matters. Rail Safety Matters, Rail Safety Review. I'm renaming it already and I've only just started. I'm waffling. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you for joining me. I hope you're enjoying listening to the podcast again. I know I am absolutely loving producing it again. Until next time, travel safe.